Okay, we are now live. Hello, Comic Jam Hawaii, and whoever else might be watching. Welcome to Story Time with Willie and Greg. We'll go around the table if you guys could just quickly introduce yourselves, and then we'll roll into it. Greg, since you're to my left here on the stream.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael, for this opportunity. I'm Greg Koudoulian. My first Comic-Con was 1972. I became close friends with the founders, and all these years I've been trying to do a documentary, and it's called Planet El Cortez, A Legacy in Time, and I call it the almost true story of the 1970 Comic-Cons, the greatest era in American art. So I've been gathering material my whole life, and then I became the recipient of the key founder, Shel Dorf Archives, then some of his brother's archives, the late Michael Dorf, and my other close friend, Richard Alf, some of his, and then George Clayton Johnson, the very popular science fiction author. He wrote the first Star Trek that aired, Mantrap. I became the recipient of a good part of his media archives. And that's me, and I call myself an El Cortez alumni, first generation Comic-Con. I've known Willie since 1973, great friend, great talent. And I've been trying to get Stacey and him together at Comic-Con, Comics Fest, and WonderCon for about 2 or 3 years. I go, Stacey, are you here? I'll give you my guest pass. Get you in. I think once you were in Orange County around the time of Comic-Con or WonderCon, and you couldn't do it. You're too busy. You had to fly out. Then she sent me a bunch of stuff to give Willie, and I brought it to Comics Fest, but then Willie couldn't bring it because he was in the hospital for a short time. Then when I got home, and you know me, archives were all a little bit of hoarding, right? I couldn't find the stuff that Stacey sent me. So when I asked Michael when I had to cancel in October, hey, let's get Willie and Stacey on here. And when he said he'd known Stacey for years, then everything became, just that much better.
Okay, Willie, I'll bring you up next.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm one of the old timers. I've been retired now for 22 years from Walt Disney, and I had a 50-year career in the animation industry. And currently in retirement, I'm producing an animated short subject based on my first book, Hello, Maggie. And it's currently in production in Florence, Italy, and Toronto, Canada. It's a kind of what you might call international production, and I've been busy at the drawing board. Fortunately, these hands are still able to manipulate a pencil, so I'm still at it.
Okay, and Stacey?
Hi, everyone. My name is Stacey Hayashi, and I wrote a comic book called Journey of Heroes about the 100th Infantry Battalion and 442nd Regimental Combat Team. And I also produced and wrote the screenplay for Go for Broke, an origin story, which is about the origin story of the 100th Battalion and 442nd in Hawaii. So I'm really not a visual artist at all. I know the story, and I'm a historian, and but yeah, I have managed to find very talented artists and people to work with to make this happen. So,
And Phil.
My name is Phil Ye, and I'm a cartoonist.
Very, very understated. So the way we're going to do this panel is we're going to kind of break it up in 2 sections. So we're going to let a conversation with Stacey and Willie. They have a particular set of interests that we need to talk about, and then we'll jump into some of the animation and San Diego Comic-Con stuff with the other 3. So with that, I'm going to remove Phil and Greg.
Excellent.
Bye. Yeah. So, hi, Willie.
Hey, hi, Stacey. Finally.
Yeah. So I guess I'm gonna share with other people that I've sent Willie some questions that that you won't be able to find him talking about already. So I'm just gonna but I realize that not everybody has seen those interviews or read those articles. So kind of recap that in the question itself. So it's sort of a multi-part question. All of them are sort of multi-part questions, but so you can kind of get the gist of what he's going to talk about, and you won't be totally lost. But the first very long question is describe what was going through your mind as the events following the Pearl Harbor attack unfolded. You were 7 years old and came home one day to find FBI and officials going through your family's house and belongings. And you mentioned your prized possession, a dopey, one of the seven dwarves, bank with coins in it. And your family really could only bring what they could carry, so the bank was left behind. So I would like you to describe your feelings about that and remember most about those dark times. And lastly, a happy thing, maybe, hopefully. How did you get a dopey bank again? Because I saw a picture of you with it, with a dopey bank later. So
very much like the way you depicted in your film, Go for Broke, where I came home from school and I saw my father and mother sitting on the couch very, very quietly. And then I looked over and there was two FBI agents with a fedora. In San Francisco in December was rather foggy, and so they had on overcoats. And, it was quite intimidating. And then I realized what they were doing is going through all of our belongings. First of all, they confiscated my father's samurai katana that he brought over from Hiroshima from his parents. And they were going through books that were in Japanese language. And then they were looking for weapons and cameras and things of that nature. And then the realization hit me that, oh my gosh, this is really what's happening as a result of Pearl Harbor. Because the day of Pearl Harbor, I was on a picnic with my uncle. He was had just graduated high school, and he was courting his girlfriend. Eventually, became my aunt, and we drove down to Santa Cruz, which is a resort area, a couple of hours south of San Francisco, and they have up here a broad walk with the roller coasters and the amusement. And so we spent the early part of the morning enjoying those. And then later we retired to the beach, laid out the blanket, and his girlfriend made a beautiful bento lunch, and we were enjoying it. Then around 4 o'clock, the fog rolled in. And it was getting pretty cold because, this was December. So we said, well, let's head back to San Francisco. As we were heading back, we got near San Francisco city limits when we noticed armed guards stopping all the cars and checking IDs. And his ID was okay, so we were flagged to go ahead. As we entered the city, practically every corner had newsboys with big headlines, extra, war. And I never, at that age, I was 8, and didn't really ever hear the word war. So I was rather curious about that, Well, events happen, and Monday, business as usual. I went to my grammar school, and one of my classmates, he kept crying, kept breaking up, and teacher would calm him down. Then he'd sit there, and then he'll start crying again. Well, we later found out that he was a son of our local Buddhist church. And that Sunday, December 7th, agents stormed into his church, and he was giving his sermon, and they just arrested him and hauled him off. And of course, the congregation was like, my goodness, what's going on here, you know? And then I came home from school, and then the FBI, they were confiscating things and all. And I panicked because this little dopey bank I acquired at age 5 when I first saw Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs on the big screen. And at that point, I knew that that's what I wanted to become. Not one of the Seven Dwarfs, but cartoons to draw these things. So that afternoon, after the matinee, we went to the Five and Dime Woolworth, and they had a soda fountain there, and we had our treat, root beer float, and a hamburger, and then later wandered over to the toy department, and I was completely enthralled with Dopey. I saw this on the in the toy area, and I had to have it. So of course my dad picked this up. I took it home, of course, and I put it on my mantle, or rather my dresser. And of course, when I went to bed, I would see Dopey, and I'd say, "Hey, good night." Next morning, I get up, and there's Dopey again. Good morning, Dopey. And I put my little allowance in there. And so Dopey was very dear to me. This was my very first souvenir after seeing Snow White. And so when the FBI left, I ran upstairs to my room, and lo and behold, Dopey was still there. But when the inevitable day came where we had to pack up and just be able to take what you could carry with your 2 hands, my comic books, my toys, they were all left behind, and to camp. And of course, the 3-year stint, and I would every so often think about Dopey, but I knew it would be in good hands, because what we did is my father entrusted our home to a good friend, which was a Chinese family, and they stayed in the home, looked after it, painted it, did all the maintenance and all. So when we were released from camp and came home, we came back to our own home. And of course, I ran up the stairs to my bedroom. There was Dopey. I shook it, but all the coins were gone, which is fun.
Well, at least Dopey was there.
Story.
Oh, well, I'm glad. Thank goodness for friends. Yeah. Jeez.
Well, I guess I might like to mention that because I was of that age where I was very aware of what was going on, we would have to go through a lot of blackouts. And so, every evening the block warden would come around and make sure that all lights were out. We had to hang black window shades, and even someone lighting up a cigarette, the whistle would blow.
Yeah, that happened in Hawaii as well. I mean, I wasn't there to experience it, but we actually enacted martial law, so everybody had to black out their windows, and they couldn't be out, and all the headlights of the cars had to be painted black. And
it was a strange time for someone of my age, because not being totally aware of the how big of a deal it is, but yet I could see my family, especially my grandparents. They were East Stays, first generation. They they immigrated from Japan. And of course, the sad thing is my grandfather died in camp of a broken heart because he came over as an immigrant, worked hard, built a life, bore 5 children, and had a home, and lost it all. And suddenly, here he's in the middle of the Utah desert, and just gave up, I guess. So it was kind of a sad, and seeing a lot of other essays that were close to our family, friends, and all. So it was trying times, but I guess we persevered. I think that's what us Nihonjins or Japanese Americans, we did persevere, and
Gambare. There's
yeah,
a word, right? Gambare.
exactly. And then of course, in camp, I always wanted to be a cartoonist. So one of the things that I did was we would be issued new Sears and Roebuck and Montgomery Ward catalogs every 3 months because we had no store in camp. We had a little dry goods store, but if you wanted clothes and things of that nature, you had to order it through a catalog. So every 3 months, a new set of catalogs would come. And I would take the catalogs. First of all, the first things that the catalog was used for was fuel, because we had potbelly stoves in our barracks, which in Utah winters were pretty cold. And, you would have to scramble for coal. And but if you're running short on coal, whatever that would burn would do it. And of course, those Sears and Roebuck catalogs were thick, so they were great fuel. But I would keep 1 or 2 aside for myself, because what I used to do is on the margins of the pages, I would animate the little figures, the bouncing ball, and things of that nature. And here we go again. I got it turned off. And so I would make my own little flip book. And I wonder why they didn't hang up. It's all junk mail, There's so
Spammers.
yeah, exactly. But so that's how I more or less practice animation in camp.
This rebate is provided by the
It's the resilience.
I wonder why.
It's the resilience, of.
Okay.
It's a very resilient story. It's that was very touching to me.
Well,
You are this little kid. They taken all your belongings and your family lost everything and put in jail for no reason. It's not, you didn't do anything wrong, but they made the best of it, and it's just and so did you. And so on that note, actually, you did mention Hello Maggie. So tell me, who is Shigeru Yabu, and how did you come together? How did you come to work together on Hello Maggie?
Yeah. First of all, Shigeru Yabu and I we're both from the San Francisco Bay Area. But for some reason, which Shig can't really figure out himself, is why he didn't end up in Topaz, Utah, the camp I went to, because supposedly he was supposed to be in Utah with the San Francisco Bay Area. He ended up in Heart Mountain, and
with the Southern California guys. Actually, a lot of the Southern California Japanese Americans ended up in Heart Mountain.
Or Manzanar.
Oh, yes, Manzanar too. Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, my wife went to Almachi, Colorado. There were 10 internment camps.
Mm-hmm.
I used to call it concentration camp.
Yeah, because that's what they were. They were concentration camps. Like
Yes,
literally,
yeah.
that's the definition.
They,
Yeah.
they were really,
And so people will say internment, to make it
yes.
nicer, but that's not. Yeah, we don't need to make it sound nicer.
Oh, it was what it was. When you have rifles pointing in,
Yeah.
guards, it was really a concentration camp, just
It
short
was.
of the rumors that we were confronted with before we went to camp. Because at that time, of course, the world news was saying how the Nazis were, throwing Jews and Poles and all that into concentration camp and executing them. So the rumor that went around in our community was, oh, well, I don't think we're going to be coming home because when the
Oh
war ends,
man.
whether America wins or Japan wins, you know, we're just going to be lined up and executed
Oh.
right in the middle of the Utah desert. I mean, those were rumors, but of course, some of the older essays kind of took it serious.
Sure. Yeah. They don't know, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And then,
That's
of course,
terrible.
having lost everything, it's like, well,
Mhm.
what are we going to come home to?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so it was like shogunite, it's like, eh. And I think my grandfather was part of that feeling and thoughts and all that. Fortunately,
Oh,
my
gosh.
grandmother came back with us, but she no longer had her own home, so she lived with us. And of course, one of the things that sort of diluted was family structure because Japanese
Mhm.
families would like to sit together at mealtime and say itadakimasu and then eat and some family says when you eat you keep very quiet and you just eat. But we were Niseis, and so we carry on a conversation. But all hell broke loose when we were in camp
Mhm.
because the teenagers all sat in one area. All the East States were all sitting together, and so the family structure was completely gone. So when we came home, it was up to my grandmother to re focus. This sit down and eat dinner and say itadakimasu Gosso-sama and the whole bit. And so, to reacclimate back uh, in the, you might say, society, American society, because uh, San Francisco's Japantown, we were known as Little Osaka, whereas Los Angeles had a big Japanese community, and it was known as Little Tokyo.
Oh.
And so we all pretty much lived in a ghetto before the war, or a Japanese settlement. Then the war, we were all again all together. Then we returned, but San Francisco's Japantown was totally integrated,
Mm.
and so what used to be, a home to a Japanese family was someone else living there. And the sad part about it is they come back from the war and they end up sleeping on army cots again, like at the
Ah.
beginning of going to camp. The local YMCA, the Buddhist church, the schools, whatever. In their gymnasium, they had to set up army cots, and all these families were all bunched together. And so coming back was as difficult as it was getting acclimated, going to camp, and being in the middle of the Utah desert, especially when you come from a metropolitan city like San Francisco.
Hmm. Gosh. So did you see Shigeru Yabu right away when you got back home?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Well, I didn't know Shig before the war,
Oh, you did? Oh, I see. Okay.
but we both,
You met after.
yeah. So post-war,
And then
Cisco,
and
we,
then when did you decide to work on that book together?
oh, well, see, Shig and I, we were in the Boy Scouts together. We were in the Japantown community, the YMCA. We did. Well, Shig was the athlete, and so eventually, as we got older, we formed a social club. And the club we were in was called the Barons, and it was about 60 strong. And we basically was an athletic club. But as we got older and started high school and got interested in girls, we started throwing dances and parties, and so it really became a social club. And then our
Mm.
counterpart, the girls, started their club. They called themselves the Stinkers, and uh, and they were, we would do dancing and learn how to jitterbug and do the whole bit. But Shig was on the shy type. He was an athlete, and his main concentration was basketball and swimming and sports. So, in while we were in the Boy Scouts, he saw that I loved drawing, and so I used to do a newsletter every week, and I would draw cartoons, and then we, I didn't have a mimeograph machine or copy machine. We had this gelatin that you lay a paper over. The image is on this gelatin, and you and you peel it, and here are the
Wow.
images. And it was a crude way, but I did it. So anyhow, uh, when I graduated San Francisco City College, Shig joined the Navy,
Oh.
and he was stationed down in San Diego, and that's where he
Mm.
met his future wife and everything. And so I used to go down to San Diego and visit Shig and his wife, and I had my wife and my oldest son. And so we would visit, and he was the director of the Boys Club in San Diego. Then he moved to Camarillo, which is
Mm.
one of our suburb cities.
That outlet mall is there.
Huh?
There's an outlet mall there in Camarillo.
Yeah, right. That's and so he was a director of the Boys Club there, and so in 1999, I was getting ready to retire from Disney, and just hang up my pencil and just relax. And Chick calls and say, "Hey, I wrote a manuscript script, and I was wondering if you might be interested in illustrating." I said, "Oh, Shig, I just retired, and
That's how it works.
yeah, right." But Shig is a little insistent, so I said, "Okay, Shig, send me the manuscript," which he did. Then I started reading. I said, "Oh, that's about his own experience in Heart Mountain and having a pet magpie." And although we were in different camps, our childhood experiences in camp is pretty much the same.
Mhm.
So I said, "Shig, I think I'd like to do that because up until then, I was not really what you might call an activist in the Japanese American community, you know.
Sure.
And so, in tackling the book, doing a lot of research material and all, I started to get the swing of things, and I started thinking, yeah, this is something that might be my way with my illustrations teach future generations, Sansei, Jonses, Goseis, and all about what the plight we went through, because they don't really talk about it and teach it in schools anymore, So
Mhm.
I guess kind of a lost period. Well, once in a while, one of my grandkids will say, "Oh, yeah, they did sort of mention how the internment and whatever," but they just kind of you know
Yeah, they gloss it over,
yeah,
right?
glossed it over exactly.
Yeah, even in Hawaii, we don't, because that's not Hawaii's story too. We don't really hear much about that. And so, like for example, my dad, they grew up in Kaka'ako, which is also sort of like a ghetto now, and it's completely gentrified. But they would call it Hayashi Yano camp, and I would be so confused because I thought, oh, they went to camp too, like what? you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
it's just, yeah, it's really not what they were not the same at all, and
yeah. As a
yeah.
matter of fact, my neighbor across the street, he's from Hawaii, and he didn't
Mm.
know anything about our incarceration,
Yeah.
anything until he came here
Hmm.
and started hearing about it. And of course, our Japanese American Janum, our museum
Yes, Janum. Hmm.
is a great place for research and all.
Right. And so for those who don't know where Janum is, it's in Little Tokyo, and the first thing you see when you walk in is all these suitcases piled high and the tar paper barracks, and it's really people should see it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's really moving because
Hmm.
uh, even myself, even though I experienced it and everything, but whenever I walk into Janum or when I go to the Heart Mountain Pilgrimage,
Hmm.
uh,
Oh, how long have you been doing that?
well, actually, to be honest with you, last year, well, the year before the pandemic, was the first time I went.
Oh, wow.
And it was at the urging of David Ono because
Oh, I see. Okay. Who did the story on you for ABC?
he
Got
was
it.
the story on Shig, which you may have seen of
Mm.
Maggie. And David did that thing on me, the kiss, and so he wanted to expand the story, and I think he's still kind of working on it too.
Sure. Actually, now that you mentioned that, so you, of course, I think most people know you as the artist, the Disney artist who is responsible for that iconic kiss, in Lady and the Tramp, and I also grew up watching and loving that, and
Oh, of course.
um, yeah, it's awesome, and to find out that some, Japanese American guy was responsible for it, it's like, whoa, what? So it's really cool.
It
And
was
so
quite a
what do you remember most about it, actually? Like,
well. First of all, I'm, at the urging of my art teacher at San Francisco City College, I'm ready to graduate. And most of my friends, like I mentioned to you, were getting into non frivolous occupations. And so I'm thinking, well, I'm going to go to Hollywood and draw cartoons. And I thought, how inhumanitarian, because girls are all going into teaching and the guys were pre-med and engineering and things of that nature. So I'm thinking, oh, drawing cartoons, my gosh. Well, I uh, at the urging of my art teacher, he, as a matter of fact, wrote a letter of introduction to the dean of Chenard's Art Institute. Chenard's was the beginnings of Cal Arts Institute.
mm,
And so I came down, and first of all, I'm leaving my Japanese community. I'm leaving my parents, all my Japanese friends, and outside of high school and with some of my Hakujin friends, I was strictly in a Japanese, type of thing, being in camp for 3 years. And
Sure. Mm-hmm.
so I was a little intimidated to leave home, come down to LA, and then just kind of take my chances as to what to expect. But since I was offered a scholarship to Chouinard's Art Institute, I thought,
Mm-hmm.
it might be great. And it's the best thing I did because my instructors were Disney animators, people like Mark Davis, one of the 9 Old Men, and he who is was one of the foremost writer directors in animation. So just by chance, I thought, as long as I'm down here and I have my portfolio, which is all high school drawings, I want to see the inside of the studio. So I'm going to use my portfolio as a ticket to get inside. So I called and they said, yeah, come on in and set up an appointment. So I went in with my high school portfolio, and the first person I met after the personnel manager was Iwo Takamoto. I didn't know if he was Japanese, Chinese, or what, but he walked into the room. He had this very stoic look on his face, and so I immediately got a little intimidated. Then he introduced me and says, "This is Iwo Takamoto." And I'm thinking, "Oh my gosh, he's Japanese, And then he greeted me with a nice, warm smile, and then we chatted. Then he took my portfolio into the conference room and asked me to wait out in the front room. And about 20 minutes later, they emerged and says, "Well, thanks for coming in. Don't call us, we'll call you." And I said, "Hey, no problem, because now I'm going to really hit it in school and make a real professional portfolio. Then in 4 years, I would go back and seriously look for work." 2 weeks later, I got a Western Union telegram from Disney Studio, and they asked me to come on in for a test. I did. Spent the morning drawing a bunch of Disney characters and all. Took a lunch break, came back from lunch, and says, "Well, you're hired." I'm hired? "Yeah, we're going to start you in the lady unit." And I'm thinking, lady. See, I didn't know a film called Lady and the Tramp was even in production.
Sure.
So lady unit back then meant I may have to start in the ink and paint department where it was all ladies. And so that might be the entry level for me, Then they said, "Well, go down the D wing and go to room such and such, and the fella in there will start you on your first project." So I walk in, knock on the door, and come in. And the sign on the door says "Milk Call." Now, Milk Call is one of Disney's 9 Old Men. So I go, "Oh my gosh, this is Milk Call." But Iwo was sitting in there. Iwo was assisting Milk Call. And he started me, and the very first drawings that he handed me to in between was a close-up of Lady. I've never seen this character before because assuming it's Disney, we're going to be doing fairy tales like Cinderella, Snow White.
Right.
But this dog character, Lady and the Tramp. So I started working on it, and I had no idea what the scene was about. You get a few drawings here and there. Then I would have to check it with Iwo, and he was a taskmaster. He was such a perfectionist. And I'm thinking to myself, is he hard on me because I'm Nihonjin?
Mm.
But no.
That's how he was.
That was him. That he was a perfectionist. And I would stand behind him for hours. I would take in my fresh drawing. he would put it on the light board, and then he would kind of flip it and look. Then he'll reach for an eraser. And I go, uh-oh, here we go again. Then he'll start correcting it and all. But, you know, that was the best training that I have ever received. Later, when I worked with Evo at Hanna-Barbera, you know, now we were friends, and I say, hey, Evo, if I came and saw a portfolio like what I showed you, I would have never hired me. And yeah, he was as well. I could see the potential, and so you know, and of course, one of the things with the animation business in Hollywood, colorblind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's your portfolio that gets you hired, you know. So that was another nice feeling to know that I'm working for a company that's colorblind. They just go by your talent, and of course, whatever anxieties I had from leaving my little Japanese community was all gone now. I'm like one of the boys.
Yeah, and for those viewers out there who are not, you know, Japanese and don't understand, you know, like what you did was actually very brave, you know, because Japanese culturally, you know, they put the good of the group ahead of themselves, you know, ahead of the individual. And, you know, like you said, you don't do anything frivolous, right? You're doing something like important, right? They want you to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, you know, that sort of thing. Definitely not in entertainment, you know. And yet, you know, what you've discovered is that, you know, entertainment is so important. You know, we need it, right, to keep our sanity. And I think a lot of the world really has seen that, has learned that firsthand with this coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah.
Like, what did everybody do when they were locked up in their homes? The first thing you do is you turn to entertainment, you know, to not lose your mind. So,
You know, one of the things that makes me feel real good, especially when I go to like Comic Cons and all that, people would come up to me and say, "Thanks for your service." And I think, well, I was never in the service. What's he thanking me for? He says, my childhood. Since I grew up watching these, and you know, it was, so I kind of felt like, well, maybe I did do something.
you did. You inspired people, you know, you comforted them, you know, with your art. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's important. Yeah.
it was good. And
Yeah.
of course, in the case of Ewell, first Nisei to be hired in the mainstream animation business
Oh,
in
wow.
1945. Just when the war ended, he left camp
Yeah.
and submitted 2 notebooks, 10-cent notebooks that he filled up with drawings and cartoons and submitted it to Disney. And this kid's good. Hire him. That's so he blazed the trail for us Asians, basically, to you know, make their way into the business. So,
Yeah. He saw that you were talented and he picked you right up.
well, well, I was lucky. I was lucky in that case. Yeah. Michael, are we running?
Yeah, I think we're gonna close up this section. Stacey, do you have any last question or comment that you need to get in before we move on to the?
I do. Right. So actually, you know, how you said your friend Greg called you up and you were about to retire, and so I know you've been retired for a while now, but I totally want you to think about this story that I have about another dog that the 442 medics brought back to Hawaii. They adopted her in Luciano in Italy as a baby. Yeah. And so they called her Lucy for short because, you know, in Luciano, right?
Yeah.
And she helped those medics keep their sanity.
Oh, wow.
Saw the worst things. And then she had puppies, and there are all these pictures of her with the puppies and the helmets. So, you know, I've been wanting to do that story, but I've been, you know, really needing an artist. And I I was like, oh my God. When I heard Mike was gonna, have you on the show, I was like, hey, ask him if he got my comic book and if he will work with me because I think that would be so wonderful.
I think that would even make a good film.
Yeah, right. I think so too. Okay.
It's something that might interest Pixar, Disney.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, but I want you to work on it.
Well, I could certainly help.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, Stacey. It's David works for ABC.
Oh, okay. I know David, actually. Yeah.
Right. And of course that's Disney owned.
Right.
Now, the last time I was up in Heart Mountain, we briefly talked about maybe Pixar or Disney might do Hello Maggie as a show. But as circumstances happened, I was in Italy in 2019, Florence, Italy, and the owner of the Accademia is a big fan, and it turns out he's a big fan of mine too. So he has this complete collection of all my old artwork, including my 2 books, Hello Maggie and Boy of Heart Mountain. And so we just sort of in passing talked about maybe they could do Hello Maggie, and then we came back and kind of forgot about it. But I was still hoping that David said he had a positive meeting about this, and because Pixar is becoming very diverse with their subject matters.
I visited. I have some friends who work for Pixar. So
Up in Emeryville?
Yeah, it's a really neat set. And then another friend who actually designed the University of Hawaii logo. His office in Oak was right across the street from Pixar.
Okay. Wow,
Still has that office, but yeah. Well, that's a nice idea, but really, you're the main thing.
I would love to help you out on that. So
yeah.
why don't we stay in touch?
Let's talk. Okay.
Never sketches and something you might talk with David Ono and because you're a great writer, so
thank you.
Something that you should put together. So, but I know Michael, we're wrapping up.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mike.
I thought Stacey did a front and center. And where can people find you and find out more about your stuff if they want to check you out?
Oh, okay. So, Journey of Heroes, the story about the 100th Infantry Battalion, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. You can buy it online at 442comicbook.com. And then you can see the movie that I made. So the comic book is the first 10 pages. Hi, thank you. The first 10 pages of the comic book is actually the movie, the storyline. So you can go see that at goforoguemovie.com. And then, at like Pearl Harbor and museum stores and whatnot. And then we're actually working on the DVD right now. So that'll be available shortly.
Okay. Stacey, thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
I'll go ahead and remove you out and we'll bring in the others. Everybody say goodbye to Stacey. Aloha. All right.
It's great to see Stacey and Willie together finally.
Okay, so this should be interesting because I know you all know each other. That's kind of like where I'd like to start. It's like, how did the 3 of you meet each other?
Well, I guess it was San Diego Comic-Con, basically.
Comic-Con, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember meeting Willie at the 73 Comic-Con. 72 was my first. My father dropped me off at 10 o'clock at the CORTEZ. My mom and sister and my dad all went to the beach and came back and picked me up at 5 one day. 73, I had a hotel, the Sheraton Harbor Island, brand new car. That's where I met Willie and Phil and Mike Royer. And Phil and some artists needed space to draw, so they came to my hotel room. Then when I met this girl, I kicked him out. And 73, I think, was Neil Adams' first convention. Of course, Jack Kirby was there. And then it's been a ritual our whole lives. But Phil was at the very first one. Me and Willie were not.
No, I'm a Johnny come lately, but it's been a great convention, one after another. I kind of started at the El CORTEZ Hotel. I know it moved around a couple of times before it ended up at the convention center, but I was a true comic book collector. So I wasn't selling any films or media or TV shows. I was there to buy comic books, and that's when it was a comic book convention.
Yeah, Michael, we didn't make every convention. We missed a few. I'm pretty sure I went nonstop, probably from 72 to the 80s, and then probably missed a couple in the 90s and the 2000s.
And Bill, how did you guys meet?
Well, I guess we met at the Comic-Con. I don't exactly remember when, but over the years, I've met so many people, various comic conventions, so it's kind of hard to remember exactly who I met, what year, where we were.
Well, as the title implies, it's a story time. So, do you guys have stories you'd like to share? Either experiences you had together, or
Well, Michael, you meet the best people in the world through Phil. Ask Willie. I've met everybody you can possibly think of. Phil goes all over the world doing the murals. He meets everybody. And like when Stacey and I don't know anybody in the world other than Phil and John J. Murakami and you two, Michael. You guys know all the best cartoonists in Hawaii. And Phil does that too, globally.
Well, I met John at, I think I met him in San Diego. And Dave Thorne, of course, Dave Thorne, I met Dave and Dennis Fujitaki and Gary Kato. And a lot of people came over from Hawaii to San Diego. And I think it was about 1977, if memory serves me correct. But all the years blend together.
Yeah, when Dave Thorne came with his group, we, spent the weekend talking comics and animation and all. And so I invited a few of them to, if they're sticking around and not going right back to Hawaii, to come up to LA. And I actually drove a couple of the guys back to the city, and I took them around the studios, Hanna-Barbera and Disney and all that. And out of that group, Todd Kurosawa ended up staying and getting into the business and doing very well. Don Doherty stayed. He's now working at Disney as a story man. And of course, Stan Sakai was a part of that group, and he saw how the studio was kind of like a factory setup. And so Stan says, "No, I don't want to work in a cartoon factory." So he created his own Yojimbo, and rest is history. But so and then of course Dave was a big fan, and we'd get together. I would take him around the studios, but I thought maybe even Dave might at one point say, "Hey, maybe I'll go back to the mainland and work in an animation studio." But he stuck it out in Hawaii, and I don't blame him.
I think Dave really liked Hawaii.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, he loved it. Yeah, you're not kidding.
Oh yeah.
About a couple of years before Dave died, we were in contact, and I had just received the Shel Dorf Archives, and I found pictures of him and Shel and Milt Caniff and the Gasoline Alley, the second cartoonist, Dick Morse. They were in Palm Springs for a weekend all together. Then I found an audio tape of the weekend that Shel made. And then Dave was telling me he thinks he might have made a film of that weekend.
Oh, oh, that's good.
I just sent you something, Michael.
Okay, I'm looking.
So in regards to Dave, I told Phil we got to get a Shel Dorf Award for him. So my friend Alan White and me created the award. I think George Clayton Johnson signed it. We signed it. Then I shipped it to San Diego, and then I think Matt Lawrence had Richard Alf and Jackie Estrada signed it. Then he mailed it to Hawaii, and you, Linda, and I think John J. Murakami signed it, and then presented it to Dave. I just gave the pictures to Michael.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Now, this is the family of comics fandom. We have 0 degrees of separation. This was a whole big group project. We all teamed up, and Shel Dorf, fan club didn't have any money, so we'd have these certificate awards. And so if somebody get one, they'd have an old friend from their past or youth they hadn't seen. But as Comic-Con got larger, and even before cell phones and Facebook, it was hard to network. So they'd always see somebody from their past, Okay, the signatories: George Clayton Johnson, John J. Murakami, Richard Alf, and of course, Richard and George Clayton Johnson are deceased. Linda Adams, William Clausen, Phil Ye, Matt Lawrence, me, and Rod Mojica. Rod Mojica is one of the executive sales managers for the exhibit hall at Comic-Con. He's been a Comic-Con employee executive for years and years.
Okay. For Phil and Greg to be so quiet is kind of alarming.
Willie,
Okay.
another story.
Well, I'm of that age where people like Milton Caniff is like the superhero. And see, back then, when it was really a Comic Con, it attracted a lot of syndicated comic strip artists.
Yeah.
And I was in seventh heaven because now I'm rubbing elbows with guys that I grew up watching their comic strips, and I remember Greg invited me up to with Shel Dorf and Bob Foster and myself. We went up to Milton Caniff's suite at the El CORTEZ Hotel, and like typical cartoonist, he had all of his work laid out on the bed, trying to meet deadlines, just the way Sergio Aragonés still does today. Like comic always fighting deadlines.
In the old days at the El CORTEZ, the late George Clayton Johnson and Richard Kyle, who were in their 40s then, said it was the best time of their lives. Everybody of any age. But when Willie would come there with his stature, and in the 70s, you were vice president of Sanrio Films. And, Willie was just one of us. And there'd be all these parties and get-togethers. And in the same room, you'd have Willie, Phil Ye, George Clayton Johnson, Ray Bradbury, Siegel and Schuster, Jack Kirby, Bob Clampett, Gene Roddenberry, all these greats. And since the King of Comics, without Siegel and Schuster and Kirby, there'd really be no comics industry. They were such classy, elegant gentlemen. You just want to run up to Kirby or Siegel and Schuster, and you'd want to hug them like a long-lost grandpa or uncle. They were that kind and generous with their time. And the thing about comics fandom, as well as science fiction fandom, the greats, the big talents, like Phil and Willie Ito and many others, they mentor people. for free. They're obsessed with mentoring people. And you know, if you want to be a rock star, I don't think you're going to get Mick Jagger to mentor you. Oh, and back at Milt Caniff, I never made it to the Palm Springs weekends, but in the Shel Archives, there's thousands of photos from the 50s to the early 2000s of everyone. Candid photos, portrait photos, medium format. I mean, he hung out literally as a teen with Chester Gould, Alan Saunders, you name it. And what's interesting, everybody told me this, when you spend a weekend at Milt Caniff's, what do you want? You could pick out a piece of original art. And you were at his home for a weekend, right, Willie? Milt Caniff's?
Not Milton Caniff, no.
Just a day?
Sweet.
Oh, okay. But in his home, he lets you have original art.
Wow.
Wow.
Well, that's something.
Well, let me ask you this. Willie, you said you went to the conventions as an attendee, as a fan and a collector.
Right.
Were there particular creators that you were looking forward to meeting?
Was there any particular?
Like artists or writers? Because you were collecting comics.
Oh yeah. Well, see, basically, I used to go down and then I'd meet up with Marty Murphy, who was the gag cartoonist in Playboy, and Mel Lazarus, who did Miss Peach, and Frank Ridgway, and that was the group. But once we were there, and then we see other syndicated cartoonists, and we all immediately would assemble, go up to the upstairs of the El Cortez Hotel, the cocktail lounge, and sit up there and just tell great stories of cartooning for syndication, newspaper, and all that, you know. Because that was one of my dreams too. Is you know, I would work in the animation business, but if I got out of it, I wanted to have my own syndicated comic strip. So I used to work on all different kind of ideas with comic strips and all that. So that was my secondary thought of rubbing elbows with some of these National Cartoonist Society guys.
Same question for you, Phil. Were there particular creators that you were looking forward to meeting at cons?
Well, I had a table at the second one. I went to the first one, 1970, as a fan. I met Jack Kirby and I met Ray Bradbury. And I asked them, I was 15 years old, and I asked Ray, I want to be a writer, but I can't spell because I later learned I have dyslexia. And Ray said, don't worry, there's editors. And I had never heard of an editor before. So I said, wow. And then I turned to Jack and I said, I want to be an artist, a comic book artist. And Jack said, I said, what college do I go to? My father was standing right behind me. My father had to drive me there. I was 15. And so my dad was a Chinese engineer who expected me to go to college. And Jack Kirby says, you can just do it right now. Just do it. So that was it. So I started my own company. A couple months later, I turned 16. And the next year I was back. This time I could drive. And I had my own company and I had my own table. And I was off and running. So my whole experience, I was just saying to my wife, I avoided getting a real job ever since. That was my goal, never to have a job. But I thought about becoming syndicated for about a minute. But then I thought, nah, I don't want to do that. So I just did my own books. And it's worked out okay.
Mm-hmm.
Greg?
Yeah, when Phil Ye would come to those conventions, I don't think I have the picture handy. He wore that giant Uncle Jam hat.
Okay,
And
well,
anyway,
speaking go ahead.
Michael,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just sent you pics of Frank Ridgway with Shel Dorf, who Willie was referring to. If people don't know, give them a refresher who they were.
Frank Ridgway was a great cartoonist.
Yeah, a real nice guy. I first went to Comic-Con because I knew, I was 19, I believe. I never knew anybody that was into comics or science fiction. Then with a couple of years, I had a comic book partner. I started selling stuff, buying and trading. And then at the 1973 con, Shel comes to me and said, Greg, are you going to start those mini cons in LA like Phil Seuling had on the East Coast, monthly Comic Cons? Yeah, we're almost got a place. He goes, hurry up, because the American Comic Book Company, Terry Stroud and David T. Alexander may do it too, be competition. So November 3rd was me and my late comic book partner, John Janevich, who was a playwright, writer, great guy, womanizer, big lawyer on the Star Wars Battlestar Galactica lawsuit, great character. So at the Hollywood Women's Club, we did the first monthly Comic Cons on the West Coast. And Kirk Allen was the first guest. We had George Takei, Jack Kirby, and everything. Then in December, Super Sunday, Terry and David T. Alexander started theirs, and they had Shel Dorf as the guest of honor. And Shel's telling us to be first competition. But it's all in the family. It was friendly competition. We did it till about almost the summer. And Mark Evanier wrote a great article. And the quote, at a Koudoulian con, you get your money back for your table in 15 minutes. The tables were $5 and then $7.50. And Super Sunday was $20 per table. This is all in 73 and 74.
Willie, Phil, did you guys go to some of Greg's conventions, the small ones?
No, I didn't really like comic books. I should start off with, I was more a fan of Ray Bradbury's. I went to the first San Diego Comic-Con because my friend Shane Noguchi, back in LA, I grew up in LA, and I went to church in Gardena, and all my friends were Japanese Americans. And I had a friend, Shane Noguchi, who loved comic books. He loved Jack Kirby. I didn't really like comic books. I never read comic books, but when I played poker with his brother, Kevin, we started our own casino in LA. And when I was not playing cards, I would say to Shane, can I borrow a comic book? Let me read a comic book. And he would give me a comic book. And he actually saw a little ad for the first San Diego convention. And he said, Phil, you must go to this convention. And I said, why? And he said, you're going to be a famous comic book artist. And I said, really? I had no interest at all. But it's very weird how things worked out. So it's very strange. But I went and I met Jack Kirby and Ray Bradbury, and the rest is history.
Phil, excuse me, let me be your external hard drive for a second. I'm pretty sure you came to the Hollywood Women's Club because Ray Bradbury was a guest. Shel brought him. We didn't put him on the flyers. Back then, before the internet and websites, a lot of people would show up that you didn't have exactly as advertised guests. So at the monthly, the first Sunday Cons at Women's Club, we had Doug Wiley, Alex Toth showed up, George Clayton Johnson, of course. We also had Ray Bradbury. All the greats would just drop by. And what our friend, a lot of people would drop by. Willie, you first came to Comic-Con just as a fan before you were an invited guest, right?
Yeah, I basically went there to fill up my run of Walt Disney comic and stories, and I had some holes, and I figured best place to try to fill those
Right.
holes.
Floyd Norman came in the 70s as a fan. He told me a couple years ago he wasn't a special guest till the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So some of the biggest greats, their humility and modesty is over the top. They just show up. When I interviewed people from my projects like Willie, and I'm glad I got him drunk for the interview, because these people, when they're so humble, Michael, you can't get the real story, the real history. You know, they don't like Eric Hoffman. When I interviewed him, he worked on Famous Monsters for years. When I finally interviewed him, he remembered that he wrote for literally a couple 300 other publications. So you really got to push them. Now back to the El CORTEZ, there were wild parties, events, all the greats, like one big family. But Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson, they had a panel and they got off the panel. And I said, is it true about Walt Disney? I go, what do you mean? Did he actually fart and tell dirty jokes in front of the animators? And they said, of course.
I'm going to bring up the photos that I got from Greg. I've got a few. Maybe that'll spark some conversation. But let me bring these up.
Oh yeah, Phil was at this. Richard Alf, who passed away in January of 2012, we had a memorial banquet. Richard financed the first 3 Comic-Cons as a teen and a comics entrepreneur. I met him at the 72 Comic-Con. The first people I met at 72 that I remember was Shel Dorf, Richard Alf, Will Lund, and Mike Tari, and of course Jack Kirby. And so we had this big memorial banquet that Steve Jeppe, Diamond Comics, sponsored. It was at the U.S. Grant, where they had the first Comic-Con. We had a banquet, and we actually had pictures there provided by Mike Tari and others of Richard eating a sandwich behind his dealer's table at the first Comic-Con in 1970, and there in 2012. Willie, I don't think you made it to the 2012 Comic-Con, or you would have been at the banquet. And there's a bunch of pictures of excuse me, Phil Ye speaking, and there might be a video. It made CBS News that night too, Channel 8. Excuse me. And so I created this, and my friend Alan Light did the graphics, and we opened this at the 50th Comic-Con.
Which was just a few years ago.
Yeah, but I didn't think of a time capsule, you know. And I figured, well, in 2012, I got this idea for a time capsule. And that's a real Halliburton Zero Stanton, Halliburton Zero case. And I used to promote, it's in an undisclosed location, like, you know, when Dick Cheney was hiding. And now he was the CEO of that company. And I still have it. We opened it up and looked at it and put it all back together.
Sorry, I'm trying to go back to the beginning here. I skipped a few photos accidentally. So you had this article for Shel Dorf.
That's what Richard wrote when Shel died. Yeah, for the program book Memoriam. Yeah, that's when Richard Alf. And then mine, I think, is on the next page. And that's Richard Butner, who I got reunited with at the 50th Comic-Con. Richard Butner, by the way, I believe was the longest serving chairman. That's Richard in his Comics Kingdom, his first store. And I have a lot of these in the Richard Alf Archives, supplemental. Most of this stuff went to San Diego State, but his mother's foundation, Martha Alf, mother's a famous artist, she died a year and a half ago. The trustees of that gave me a lot more stuff from Richard's archives, his collection.
Now, Comics Kingdom's no longer around, right?
Oh, no, it got sold to Jack Dickens. He bought it. Then he sold it, and then other people took over and became a different owner, different name. And I think about, 5-6 years ago, there's no more comic book store. It's next to a friend's bookstore called Footnote Books, yeah. But I don't think there's no more comic book store there at all. And that's Richard. Richard was in signage, real estate. He worked for, who's the company that owns USA Today?
Yeah.
Huh?
Gannett.
Yeah. So he worked for them. So for the 50th, Detroit Free Press, Shel was a freelance journalist and an employee there for about 20 years on and off as a photojournalist. So I talked to the editor and I said, look, you guys ought to do something, my articles and pictures. He goes, what do you mean? Well, it's 50th Comic-Con. Shel worked for Detroit Free Press and Richard worked for the parent company USA. But, you know, trying to get big media to cover it, you know, in this aspect of it, I tried and submitted stuff, but unfortunately it didn't happen. But there you go. Richard had a connection with USA Today and, of course, Shel with Detroit Free Press. Oh, yeah, that won the contest. After Shel died, they did a fundraising to raise money for artists, and that was done by Tony Gleason. What an artist. It won, and he gave me permission to use this for some stuff. And of all the hundreds of characters I've seen of Shel, this is like the best and my favorite. And he did this in at the 2010 Comic-Con. Yeah, I found this in the Shel Dorf Archives. Mike Towery, who's the founder of Comic-Con, co-founder, him and Bear founder, all these three are founders of original Comic-Con. And for Comics Fest, Mike Towery and Barry Alfonso are the founders. So this is a group they had, and this is their little
this is the meeting
memo thing that they put out. Yeah, I found this. Yeah, I found this and then posted it. Yeah. Yeah, this is a famous field trip to Kirby's home. I believe, yeah, when Kirby moved to Southern California in '69, he lived in Irvine for a few months before Simi Valley. Okay, here we go. This is my the panel I did for the 50th. And there's this is my group. There's Mike Royer, there's me, Matt Dunford's the chair of Comics Fest, Bill Morrison, the editor from Mad Magazine, Terry Stroud, the only dealer exhibitor in the universe to be at every single Comic-Con. There's Steve Jeppy and his son Josh from Diamond, Elliot S. Megan, the greatest Superman writer, and Alfonso, who's the president of Little Fish Comic Book Studios for Kids. And Steve Jeppy actually at this panel said that Elliot S. Megan is the greatest Superman comic book writer. I got videos of it and a ton of more photos.
Okay. This is a flyer.
Yeah, we got Jim Harmon, the radio show person, and Will Gould, the Red Berry. We had them at this convention. And you can see it's a West Coast First Monthly Convention 5. There's my home address, living with my parents. And $5 for dealer's table. And, Mark Evanier did the flyer. Me and John Janevich did a flyer. We're not artists. And Evanier goes, this is terrible. And he just kept cranking out the flyers. And he helped out a lot with the convention. I can't remember if he scored some guests. He probably did. But he wrote at least one or two articles promoting it. Plus, he did almost all their flyers. Yep, Kirk was our first guest, good friend. Knew him since the 70s. He was, when he got divorced, his wife kind of got him alienated from his children. And he just immersed himself with young people. I mean, Kirk Allen, you guys, Phil, Will, you knew him well. You know what he was like.
No comment, huh?
I didn't really know.
I don't know. You guys' memories, you got stoned more than me, so you should remember better.
I never, I didn't take any drugs.
Yeah, that never an excuse. Yeah, that holds up really good.
By the way, Stacey's still backstage. Stacey, if you ever want to chime in, just wave and I'll bring you up.
Oh, brother.
I think... Ask Stacey. She hasn't been to a Comic-Con in several years, or not at all. I forgot.
Oh,
San Diego Comic-Con. You were there years ago, or not at all? I don't remember.
She's muted.
oh, how do I?
No, I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh. Oh, I exhibited at Comic-Con in 2013. So the first year that I had my comic book. But yeah, I haven't been back since like 2016. I used my professional badge, and then they didn't renew my pro badge. I was kind of insulted. I was like, hey,
Well, you know that can happen, but let's hope we can all be there next year together. You know.
yeah. Well, I don't know what I need to do to renew my credentials because they're like, they accept movie screenwriters and producers and filmmakers. So I sent in the things for like my IMDb, and they were like, no. I was like, whatever, it's IMDb. I'm not making this up. Come on. Yeah. So I don't know.
It happens. It's probably a simple mistake, but Oh yeah, that's another picture. That's at Richard's booth at the El Cortez. He had a pretty big display. He dropped off the committee in '73, but he was still selling at Comic-Cons, I believe, up till the '80s. Yeah.
I was a child of the '70s, and that outfit is giving me flashbacks.
Well, when we see these old photos, in the fandom, we're such big collectors. When you have an old photo of yourself, you're supposed to comment, "I still have that shirt."
Still fits, right?
Does it fit?
Oh boy.
Yeah, that's the Shel Dorf tribute panel after he died.
Flattering picture of me.
Yeah, this is Comic-Con. Yeah. I don't have that shirt, but Richard Alf, the late Richard Alf, and there's me, and this is the 2010 tribute panel to the late Shel Dorf, Comic-Con's key founders. Don't forget, a few months after the first Comic-Con in '64 in New York, Shel Dorf and Dr. Jerry Bales did the Detroit Triple Fanfare in Detroit, which was a 2-day con. The first Comic-Con, the New York Comic-Con '64, was 1 day, like 5 or 6 hours. So Shel's like the ultimate creator of Comic-Cons. Oh, and I'm giving that award to Phil. It's called King of the Murals Award for doing all his murals.
I'm giving you a word there?
Yeah, and that's my... Yeah. The one before that. You want to go back one, Mike?
No, let's move on.
Yeah, that's Phil's award we gave him. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Okay. And then the next picture.
Oh, God.
That's Richard Alf in the middle, me in the right, and the left is Mike Pasqua. He was one of the longest vice presidents of Comic-Con, former executive, and attorney, and a teacher educator, and a guitarist. And I forgot that too. There's me with my old friend Alan White. On the badges and the awards for the Shel Dorf fan club, I gave him the ideas, and he's the graphic artist that would just zap it out. And all of us have known each other since the early '70s. And this is Comic-Con, probably 2011 or 2010.
I'm gonna queue up Phil's photos, but we'll open up for discussion for now. Let me get set while you guys talk. Talk.
Phil, have you met Stacey before?
No, never. No. Hi, Phil.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, this is great. I'm so glad that this finally happened. And
Here's
yeah.
a picture, Willie and I with Jerry Siegel's daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah, Laura Carter Siegel, ABC News in Palm Springs. She's got like a dozen Peabody and Emmy Awards, and now she's retired, I believe, in Las Vegas.
And I was the first person to interview Jerry Siegel in 1975. And this is so strange. Laura was his daughter. She was a teenager when I interviewed him. And that story we broke the story. The LA Times picked up our story, and the LA Times ran it 3 days later, and then the world knew about the story.
And Michael and Stacey, Laura Carter Siegel is really Lois Lane. She was one of the top anchors in Palm Springs for ABC. And she retired about 10, 15 years ago, roughly. She has at least 8 or 9 Peabody and about 8, 7, 14 Emmy Awards.
Oh, wow.
Really is
Wow.
Lois Lane in every shape or form. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's a much better picture. And there's William Floyd
Is that
signing our guitar, one of our guitars.
Oh, that's cool.
And Phil, that's at Comics Fest, right?
Yes, Comics Fest.
This is what Willie had signed it here.
Did I
Willie
say-
and Floyd Norman. Yeah, I think, Willie, do you remember signing the guitar?
I don't remember anything. You know how it is at comic convention.
At Comic Fest,
Yeah.
somebody brought over a guitar.
We have proof.
Yeah,
There's a proof.
and also Jerry Eisenberg signed.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Oh, God.
And what happens with these guitars, Phil? I know you've had a couple of
Well,
them now.
The idea is we have 5 guitars. They're signed by artists, writers, rock stars, actors. Anyway, the idea is to get them displayed. I would like to get them displayed at the Cleveland Rock and Roll Museum.
Oh,
We're
wow.
working on it. may
Cool.
never happen, but we're working on it.
That would be good. Yeah, it would be good. Yeah.
Yeah. But
You gotta,
we have
you
a
gotta get
lot of people, a lot of artists who have drawn on the guitars, and some really outstanding people
Mhm.
like Willie. And there's Willie.
Oh,
Yeah,
boy.
but that's at San Diego Comic-Con, the older badges. Yeah, a few years ago.
Have you guys been to the D23 thing since?
No, I haven't. I haven't really been myself. Yeah, it's gotten to a point where those huge crowds drive me crazy.
Yeah. When I did San Diego Comic Con in 2013, it was really, that was our first Comic Con after publishing my book, and it was like throw you not even into the deep end of the pool, it was just like throw you into the ocean. You know, it was so crowded and everything was so expensive, and it was stressful. Yeah.
The only way I would go to San Diego Comic-Con is if I have a table at Artist Alley for 3 days or 4 days, and I just sit there at my table, because eventually everyone you're down there to see will come by your table. So you just stay in one place, and Phil's always about 2-3 booths away from me, and you know, and I take my grandson, and he does all the running around, get water for me or whatever. But now they give us like intern to do all that. So you know, it's pretty good. But yeah, but
I prefer the Comics Fest. I like the Comics Fest.
Yeah, I do too. As a matter of fact, this is the month of Comic Fest.
Oh.
Yeah, because even when things improve in the future of the pandemic, I think people are going to be a little scared to be in giant crowds again. So I kind of predict conventions are going to have to be smaller and spread out for a few years. Because the history of pandemics is like 2 to 5 years, you know.
I was going to ask you, Stacey, about like the Aloha Con and the ones in Hawaii.
We actually didn't really have, we had Kawaii Con, which was really more like anime and stuff, and that's a good one if people go, but it is a different genre, you know.
Okay.
So when the Amazing Con came to Hawaii, they brought Stan Lee, you know, so they came out, you know, swinging.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so that was really cool. So I And I knew that it was the first time Stan Lee had been back to Hawaii in decades.
Oh,
So I asked the organizer, Jimmy J. I was like, "Hey, do you want the governor to declare it Stan Lee Day?" And he didn't get back to me. I guess he didn't really. It didn't sink in what I was asking him, and the governor's office didn't get back to me either until a couple of days before. And I was like, "Hello, do you guys want? Stan Lee is coming in. I don't know if he's gonna come back again. We should get him now." If you want to do anything for him, and then it just all happened in less than 48 hours, and it was really great though. Yeah, Stan was wonderful.
yeah.
I got a good story. I can't say the names to protect the innocent, but a few years ago, they had some great creators at one of the Hawaii Comic Cons. I haven't been there, and I asked them and their, assistants, "Hey, but I thought he always charges." Hell no! If I get invited to Hawaii, I gotta charge no fee. So Hawaii can get anybody as a guest, at a deal.
Well, they had to, pay him.
Yeah, there's payment. I'm familiar with some of the organizers of the conventions here, so they pay people to come in.
Oh yeah, but these two, the one or two I remember, they get paid, but they didn't care if they did a freebie for Hawaii for one con.
It's alarming some of the rates people can demand too.
It is, yeah. It's crazy.
I talked to the guy years ago that does the SuperCon in July in what was it, Orlando? Yeah, and he sold it to one of the big companies. And he says, "Yeah, we're not that big of a con, and what?" And I said, "You get William Shatner? Yeah, we pay him $50,000 to come, and the con can afford it. Yeah, that's our whole thing." So
yeah,
he explained how it worked.
I don't know when we're going to have in-person conventions again, but Willie, if you want to come, I can certainly talk to people. I know people.
Oh, well, that would be great. It's somewhat my roots because my father was born in Hilo.
Oh, what? Really? So when did he move to LA or San Francisco?
In the 20s. See, he was born in Hilo, and then
I can't hear it.
Went back to Hiroshima, and so in school, then rather than go back to Hawaii, he settled on the mainland.
Wow! So he was a kibe, right? He was educated in Japan, and he was
a musician, and so in the 50s, he kind of taught me how to strum some on my Martin ukulele.
What? You have a Martin?
I have a Martin.
Oh my God! You have to play with Jake Shimabukuro.
Well, I'm far from that. I just
no.
But we had a ukulele group, the Barons in our club, and
That's
we had the wash tub bass, and then a fellow named Peter Sano had the baritone, and then I had the regular street uke and others, and we would serenade the stinkers at the beach.
That's awesome! Oh my goodness. A Martin, I don't know if you guys know what a Martin ukulele is.
Oh yeah, they're expensive.
Oh, what a
My dog has fleas.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool.
I'm gonna say you guys are all artists except for me. I get a lot of support and sponsorship from my projects from the Jeppy Museum, Steve Jeppy, Diamond Comics, all kinds of people. My niece, Arpi Simonian, and my sister, Eileen Simonian, their company is Arpine Merchandising, and she has a brand new giant $25,000 roll-in printer that does murals, billboards, all that. So, Phil, for future projects, and the next big Comic-Con, I want to do like a memorial mural of all the greats that are deceased because I have all the photos and the rights of so many people. Kyle, Bradbury, Shel, Richard F. Many. And if any artists need it to support the arts, you probably get the best deal. But it has to be local because these big giant things come off the rolls, and all that. But I just wanted to throw out there, they helped me on my project. With, I don't really have much money, and Adobe's given me all their programs for free, everything. And Tiffin Corporation helped me because when I started this legacy project, and I mean, I've got Phil on camera, Willie on camera, photos. My goal is to make all these great creators even more immortal.
Good goal.
But I think Phil, are you not in again? I mean, haven't you done more murals around the planet than anybody else with your posse?
We did a lot of murals, over 2,000.
Wow.
In every state except for Alaska. We've done a lot of them in Hawaii. At one time I had murals in all the Borders bookstores, and of course Borders is no longer in business.
I know.
Yeah, I miss it so much.
Yeah, those are fun days. Yeah.
So, Willie and Phil, I know you guys have met through the convention, but have you guys worked on any projects together?
Actually not.
No, I don't
Well,
think
Phil,
so.
years ago, Matt Lawrence had the idea for the airport mural for Comic-Con, and you guys got all the stuff. Me not being an artist, all I did is talk to Charles Schultz Associates and got the permission to use Snoopy and the Doghouse. And
Yeah.
Phil, Matt Lawrence, everybody, you did all of these, and it was a big mural at the
That
airport.
mural was actually done on a computer. So it was really, for me, it was a very unique project because they used computer, so I didn't have to do anything. Took an old drawing and put it on and put Charles Schultz, Milton Caniff, and all the other guys.
Yeah, we got all the pictures and articles on that. I don't think I have any of that handy to give you, Michael.
I did contribute to Phil's one of his murals with the Coyote Roadrunner.
Yeah.
Tony Benedict came and he did Fred Flintstone.
Oh, yeah. In San Bernardino at the first McDonald's. And that's permanent.
Wow.
It's still there. It's permanent. And
Are you still adding? You still add to it, right?
Yes, we're still adding to it. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, the museum's been closed, but hopefully it'll be open soon. And Linda and I are getting our second shot next week, so we hope to be back in the world again.
Yeah, one more thing I got to say. I've been living with since I moved here from Vegas, me, my sister, and niece have been living together for years. And my nephew, he got married and moved out a few years ago. And if it wasn't for my big sister and my niece supporting my projects, I wouldn't be able to get anything done. Oh, okay. Willie, tell them the story about Michigan Frog. The frog out of the time capsule, how you and Chuck Jones created that, correct?
Yeah. I was working in Chuck's unit at that time, and the animator Ken Harris that I assisted, he was so good on dancing stuff that of course he got sort of typecasted. So with like Michigan Frog dancing across the stage singing "Hello, my baby," "Hello, my honey," and all that. I worked on all that, and then of course on What's Opera Doc, "Kill the rabbit, kill the rabbit." I worked on all that too. So,
Willie, what did you do on Hello Kitty? You were involved, weren't you, a little bit?
Oh, you mean Sanrio?
Yeah.
Yeah. I initially worked on some of the presentation stuff to get the series or get the feature off the ground. Then once we started, I went in as the production coordinator, and at that point, I have to say, it was about 22 years in animation, cranking out footage for television, and I start to feel a little burnout. And so when Sanrio completed the metamorphosis, which turned out to be a real, I went back to Disney and went to work in the comic strip department. Animation was, I just thought that's it. I'm burnt out. But so basically, I ended up my career at Disney in Disney Consumer Products, creating merchandise for 800 Disney stores around the world.
Wow.
So that was
Michael, I've been doing this for years. I sent you the pictures. A couple of years ago, Phil called me and says, Greg, you want to have dim sum in Monterey Park at NBC Seafood? I said, I've been going there for years, one of my favorites. So then I called Willie and said, Willie, let's surprise him, because Willie only lives a couple miles from there. So in that picture, you see where the shocked look on Phil's face, Michael?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, me and Willie are sitting there, and Phil and Linda walk in, total shock. They see Willie sitting next to me. It's the bottom picture, I think. Yeah. Just Phil by himself. There you go, the bottom right. And then afterwards, Willie says, come up to my house. I said, aren't you busy? He goes, no. So all day, I don't know how long we were there. We were partying, talking. I was videoing in, and we're in the studio. And, oh, yeah, there we are in front. Yeah, that's in the studio. And I'm there, and my camera and tripod's next to me. What I learned, I'm just an amateur novice photographer, but I try to do everything candid as much as possible,
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Yeah, there we are.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, when can we go back to that place,
Oh, I know. I keep wondering about these Chinese restaurants that, like the dim sum places and all. It's not the same ordering takeout. You have to order it off the cart, and then it's steaming hot, and it's not the same. But,
well, me and Willie went to the place in the mall, and then Atlantic Seafood for the first time in years. It was always parking in the mall. It was difficult. I mean, I was in shock. It was great and had like the best prices. I mean, I've been going to San Gabriel Valley since the 80s, and of course Chinatown since the 70s. And Valley Boulevard at night, Saturday night.
It's like being in China.
Valley. Yeah, you think you're in Tokyo or China. Every restaurant. Once I made a video of it, everybody's outside partying on the streets. You think you're in Europe or even in the gas pump. I mean, I'm just going, wow. And I only just figured that out like 10, 15 years ago.
Well, normally it would be jumping now because it's Gongwei Fat Joy,
Yeah, it's a Lunar New Year right now. Yeah.
My community would have been Monterey Park, Alhambra. It's the mecca now, because the downtown, the old Chinatown, it's the old early Cantonese residence.
Mm-hmm.
But now here in Monterey Park and Alhambra, you have all the new immigrants from China, and so you have such a variety of cuisine. Szechuan, Mandarin.
It's my favorite place. I learned years ago, because I used to work in Monterey Park, East LA, from 85 to 88. So I go all over. And somebody says when you're freaked out or stressed, just go have dim sum. I'm just paraphrasing the quote. And some of these restaurants I've been going to since the 80s, and some of them still have the same employees. And when I walk in there, I get treated, always like royalty, never have to wait, I always have fun.
Yeah, it's such a variety. When I lived up in San Francisco as a kid, it was basically the Canton style, and it's American Chinese style. You got the chashu and the tofu, and the chow mein, and things of that nature. Basically, created by Chinese Americans that came over, the early Cantonese settlers. So I grew up enjoying that phase of Chinese food. And then now with the immigration of all of these different style of Chinese food, I have to admit, my favorite is still the good old-fashioned China meshi, as we used to call. It's and whenever there's a restaurant like in Little Tokyo, or there used to be one here, if it was China meshi, the Chinese style that the Japanese Niseis grew up with, that was always full of Japanese Americans. And then a couple of blocks down would be one of the authentic new immigrant Chinese restaurant. And I happened to walk in there to, took someone there. And eating in there is the waitress from my favorite Cantonese restaurant. You could eat right there at where you work. She says, no, she doesn't like it. She's
Hey,
more.
let me ask everybody this: Is dim sum a restaurant where everybody feels comfortable just walk in and buy themselves for a sit down meal?
Yeah, it's.
Because I go all the time and I'll tell people to meet me, but it doesn't matter if I'm alone or not.
No. And it's so vast.
Yeah.
So, but I'm sure these places are really hurting right now. Especially
Oh God, yeah.
the poor gals that used to bring the carts.
Yeah.
Outside dining on patios, I don't see how they can facilitate it there in a lot of those places.
But,
Yeah, we're mostly takeout still in Hawaii.
yeah, right.
Picked up Chinese food the past couple of days, and just takeout.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just
But,
a hand-
speaking of Chinese food in San Francisco, though, that's actually the first meal that the 442 had when they got to San Francisco.
Oh,
Yeah, so Hung Wai Ching was like the father of the VDV in my movie, right? But he went ahead of the 442 when they left Hawaii, to get to Camp Shelby in Mississippi.
Yeah.
And he made sure that when they landed in San Francisco, they got to go to Chinatown for some Chinese food.
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Japantown, we were all in camp at that time.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Terrible. Yeah.
But yeah, they had some real good Chinese restaurants in Japan now, which was the old Cantonese style. And they used to have wedding receptions, funeral afterwards, all kind of events there. And it was, it had the partition, big round table, old wooden chairs and all, but it had an atmosphere.
Yeah.
Just remember when the pandemic's over, we'll be partying like the Roaring 20s. You remember the Roaring 20s after the
All that, it's it is a shame. Now, you guys in Hawaii, you're all hunkered down too, right?
Pretty much. We're actually pretty safe here. I think the positivity rate is about like 2% less than that now. Mike.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but you have the lowest fatality rate in all of America.
Because we shut down, and also because people are more considerate and they do wear the masks, whereas it's crazy, on the mainland.
Crazy.
It's so nuts.
And they're Trumpers, and it's like, my gosh, can't they learn a little lesson from the Asians?
Yeah.
There's so many countries in the world, because of everything, history and culture, they wear masks. But
Japanese have been wearing masks for over 100 years. I mean, all these ukiyo-e prints, and they're wearing the masks. Yeah.
And they wore masks in the Wild West, the cowboys, but not now.
Well, that's a little different.
Since we're on this topic of the pandemic, what have you guys been doing respectively to keep yourselves occupied?
Losing my mind.
Pretty much 8 hours a day.
Here's a serious note people should know. We have so many non-COVID deaths and sicknesses in the pandemic. People are less active. They're scared to go to the doctors. If they're in the hospital for anything with a broken leg or anything, they have a fear. And then you go in and out, no COVID, a lot of issues get ignored, mistakes because of the whole system. I've lost friends and relatives from non-COVID because misdiagnosed. This outpatient test delayed month and month, then they're gone. Got delayed. So this is a serious issue. It's compounded, not just with COVID. And I wear a mask. I stay away from everybody. I'm careful, I try to help everybody. In the beginning, I got masks and sanitizer for cheap. I would send it to people, trying to educate them about hygiene. Because in my car, I've had isopropyl alcohol and antibacterial for almost 20 years at ATMs, all of this. I just started being a germaphobe. But I never thought of wearing a mask, So we had to.
Okay. Oh, I was going to ask, Willie, did you get my comic book that I mailed you?
Oh, yeah.
You did? Oh, okay. Great. So I'll mail you some masks because I did make some aloha shirts with made fabric. Yeah. And so this is, I don't know if you can see this, but this is not a mask.
Oh, how nice.
Yeah. So I'll send you some. I didn't have time to pack it when I was sending you the book, but I'll do that. So that's actually what I've been doing. I've been shifting.
The book is riveting. I started watching it and just got right into it, and so it was well written. And you guys really got a cast of thousands.
We did.
Effects, green.
Stacey, have you made 442 masks?
I did, yeah. So this is the comic book, right? And so can you see it? That's that's Barney and his bonsai tart.
Oh yeah.
This is like a bag, yeah. So this is the book. And then there's 3 different colors, and I made aloha shirts. But because when the pandemic, broke out, I actually I made the masks, and I was like, hey, I'll give you a free mask if you buy an aloha shirt, so you'll match,
Oh yeah.
Wow. I gotta get one of those. Hey Phil, you gotta make masks too. Uncle Jam mask or whatever, your characters.
Oh, yeah. I've been painting. Doing a lot of painting.
I bet Linda's happy because the kitchen is nice and painted now, and
I don't think Linda's happy. I'm home painting all the time.
But it sounds weird, but it's normal for a great artist to actually paint homes and buildings. I have seen it more than once.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But yeah, it's I'm really see what happened is when all the Comic Cons were canceled, the fans that would normally buy drawings from me or commissions or whatever, they started reaching out to me, by email and messenger and whatever, and all of a sudden I'm just inundated with with commissions, which is a blessing in disguise, I guess you might say, and so that's been good. And then of course the Hello Maggie film came up, and I had to do storyboards. I do twice a week Zoom with Italy and Canada to see how the work is going and all that. But when it comes to you, Stacey, and if you have that idea with the dog character adopted by the 442, I think that would be a very good project.
Yeah, right. It's so lovable.
It's gonna make me cry, that movie, for sure.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, like, I didn't even know about this dog until
Oh,
after I had written the comic book, and so like Eddie Yamasaki, who is the chibi with the glasses in my book, he was in he had moved to Japan. He after the war he married a girl from Japan, and then he would actually go back and forth,
oh,
from Hawaii and Japan, and then eventually his daughter was like, "Why don't you just move here? I'll take care of you. You can live with us." So that's what he did. And then, so we were in Japan, and he was like, "Oh, do you want to see my pictures from Europe?" And I was like, "Yeah." I'd known him for so many years, but I had never seen his photo album. And I would just drop him off or pick him up. And then I'm flipping through and I see the dog, and he's like, "Oh yeah, she was the 3rd Battalion's mascot." And she
oh my
had dog
goodness.
tags. Yeah, and I was like, "What?" Like, why didn't anybody tell me about this dog? I would have put her in the comic book. And he was like, "Well, she wasn't that important." And,
Oh,
but the photos were great. Yeah.
even in the old Overroad group of Downtown, the character that Henry Nakamura played, I think it was a goat that he.
Yeah, well, it was the pig. It was a
Oh,
pig.
the pig.
Yeah, so it was pet.
It was the pig to the starving
The-
Italian.
yeah,
You
that was sad.
With animals, you'll get a real good heart tug, and
Really, yeah. And their 442 always had dogs. Wherever they went, they adopted like a puppy, or and they would feed it. And there's all these pictures of different companies with dogs.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good premise. Are you writing some kind of a script for that right now? Or?
I do. I have I wanted to do like a children's book, and kind of because there's a picture of her as a puppy and like growing up with every single medic, and then there's like all these pictures of her like with the medics. That's all the medics together, and like her, and then they're like on a mountainside holding Lucy. They're really good pictures. So it would be a great story. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, and it'll certainly be embraced like at the Japanese American Museum and all that, because
I'm gonna send you some pictures. You do some sketches.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yay.
Yeah,
What was
course.
the name of the project you're working on?
Huh?
What was the name of the project you're working on? Maggie something?
Oh, Maggie. Hello, Maggie was a book.
Oh,
You mean his
yeah,
book that?
Yeah, this one here, we're sold out completely right now. And if I'm going to go into reprinting another batch, we're going to add about 4 new pages about the 442, and just to expand it. Now, in the film version, we have a whole sequence that will be related to that. The little girl that lives next door named Kimiko, she sees that flag.
The Gold Star flag. Yeah.
And so she asks Jig, "Well, what's that mean?" And then Jig says, "Well,
Nice.
my uncle is in the military." And then we go to maybe 4 pages of just black and white illustration, like a newsreel thing. And
That's great.
In the film version, those sequences will just be in black and white. And some of the illustrations from this book, Boy of Heart Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, we have. Bear with me. Talk amongst yourselves. Okay, I got it. See, this book is just black and white illustrations. It's not fully colored as that is, and so it kind of lends itself. Here's
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
that's that famous photo in Bruyere.
That's it.
Yep. It's
Nice.
super steep. That terrain is really steep. It's crazy.
Yeah, and then finally when they rescued they captured some of the Germans,
Mm-hmm.
and they're looking at the short little Japanese guy saying Japanese. They're not too sure.
Yeah. The French people thought they were Chinese.
Yeah,
They're confused.
they've never seen Asians before, so But so we want to kind of add some of that, and then of course the military intelligence, give credit there because
Yeah.
they've been totally overlooked. In fact,
Yes,
they were
absolutely.
secret, and
Hmm.
they were so kept secret that no one knew it existed.
Right, because they were classified, and so they were
Yeah,
told to not talk about what they did, and so a lot of them, they follow directions, and then they went to their deaths, not sharing their stories, and no one could ever appreciate them. But General Willoughby, he was second in command to MacArthur. He credits them with shortening the war in the Pacific by 2 years, saving over 1 million lives.
that's
Yeah, and I believe that because of, like the Battle of Okinawa alone, there are 250,000 casualties, and most of them were civilians. It was terrible. But I actually did write a comic book about the MIS, the Military
okay.
Intelligence Service. But it's, of course, I got tired of fundraising, and so it's, it's just my stick figures and the book, like the text.
Yeah. It's see, my uncle, the one that took me to Santa Cruz on Pearl Harbor Day.
Oh, he was MIS?
Actually, he was drafted, but because he spoke Japanese, he was part of the occupation force
Oh,
in Japan after
mm,
the surrender.
I see.
And because my father's family was in Hiroshima,
Mm-hmm.
every birthday I used to get omiyage or a gift from my
Wow.
grandparents in Hiroshima.
Mm.
And suddenly, during the war, it stopped. And then after
Ah.
the war, we never heard from them. So
Mm.
my father asked my uncle, when you're in Japan and maybe on your leave or something, if you could go down to Hiroshima and sort of check it out. Well, it turned out that they did survive, but they
Oh,
lost.
good.
Yeah. And I don't know if eventually radiation may have gotten to them and all that, but
Oh.
and my father never did see his parents thereafter. And he always
Oh.
had plans of going back to Japan, taking up my mother, and going kind of on a vacation. Then World War II broke out. And I told you earlier, my father was a musician.
Yeah. What did he play?
Reed instrument, sax and clarinet.
Wow.
So he led the YBA, the Young Buddhist Association
Yeah.
Orchestra in Oakland. And then he, with maybe four of the other people in that orchestra, they formed a jazz group and they played American jazz music. And so in Japan, they heard of this Nisei group playing American jazz, and they thought, wow, how mezurashi, how. So they were invited to come to Japan and tour for about 6 months playing American jazz.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden, you know, Japan invaded Manchuria and
Hmm.
started getting hot. So all passports were confiscated.
Yeah.
So they couldn't come home. But see, what happened is the uh, when they were forming to go to Japan, my father went to my mother. They weren't married yet at that time. And so he says, I got a chance to Japan. And she gave him an ultimatum. It's either go to Japan or me.
Mm.
So he decided to stay.
Wow.
The group went to Japan, and then passport confiscated. They were stuck in Japan all during the war.
Oh my gosh.
But the irony of it is my father ended up going to camp anyway.
Wow.
But years later, they all came back, and we sponsored them to come back, and they all had
Wow.
brides.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Well, good thing your mom gave an ultimatum. My gosh, there's so many stories of veterans who, they're or not even veterans, but just families who did go to Japan and they were stuck in Japan.
Yeah.
Even like Ted Tsukiyama, in my movie, his
Okay.
older brother was in Japan because he couldn't find work as an engineer, like an aerospace engineer in Hawaii, in America. And so he went to Japan, and then he lost his U.S. citizenship. Like they drafted him for the Japan military, and you can't say no, And so that's so traumatic. There are a number of Japanese Americans, not only from Hawaii but from just the U.S. mainland, and they were conscripted and they fought, and some of them died for Japan. That's awful.
Stacey, isn't there a very touching story of American Nisei doctor in Japan that got drafted that died tragically in the Aleutian Islands in combat?
Iska thing.
His friend was on the other side.
Well, there's a lot of that actually.
There's a lot of that.
Yeah. I mean, there's even Ken Akune. He was MIS. He lives in the Gardena Ferns. But I mean, his brother Harry also fought for the U.S. and they volunteered out of camp. And then their two brothers fought for Japan. They had no choice, and so they would argue about it. After the war. And his father. You can actually look up their story. I think it was on CNN or something for Veterans Day. But I mean, that's just one story of many of families that were ripped apart and by a war that they had nothing to do with. I mean, they just happened to be Japanese American, and so and got stuck. So yeah, very sad.
And then there's that Guy Gabaldon story. He's Hispanic, and in Boyle Heights, before the war, was heavily Hispanic. Well, it was a melting pot, actually.
Oh, Frank, right? And then he went to camp with his friends, right?
Yeah,
I saw that story.
A little Japanese from the parents and all. Then he's in the Pacific, and he captures about 1,200 prisoners. Because in the caves were some soldiers and families and women and children, and then he speaks Japanese and says, "You guys best surrender because you'll never get out of it alive." So they all come out of the caves. And they all line up.
Yeah, he was a great hero. That guy, yeah.
Walking in front and all this.
There are a lot of stories like that. They're actually called the cave flushers, in Okinawa and Saipan. And Herb Yanamura was one of them. He's in my movie as well, like at the very end on the palace steps. He saved the lives of over 1,500 people in the Battle of Okinawa by using his, Japanese language skills. So he was a guy from Kona, and he was with the 442, but he went to the MIS because intelligence was a higher priority than infantry. So, yeah.
Wow. I hope we can all meet up at Comic-Con and in Hawaii soon, when things get better.
Yeah, I think you should really, because you're getting a lot of first-hand stories, having interviewed so many people and all that, and put it all down, because this is something that will be movie worthy, documentary worthy, animated shorts, and David Ono is a big, he wants to perpetuate these stories to realizing that the generation is being lost. So it's that young people like yourself has taken to getting a good handle on it. Keep it perpetuated.
Stacey, you'll appreciate this. I have so much material. I can do 10, 20 documentaries and as many books. I could do at least one or two each on Willie and Phil. And I only want to do historical culture. I don't want to do any fiction because I can always get corporate sponsorship and help. George Clayton Johnson, I think, told me like 10 years ago, and some other friends, Greg, you have all these collections of interest. You have this document, you have a Comic-Con document, you have this. And one thing I want to do in a couple of years, Myth of the Dragon Ladies, Asian American women in the cinema. They did not get the best deal to be conservative. And that's something that has to be pointed out. And all of these past things, because I was very lucky when I was 7, 8 years old, an Armenian kid in LA. I had Black and Asian cousins. My first cousin married a lady from Hawaii. And it was, well, Hawaiian, you guys, and she would explain to me, oh no, I'm Hawaiian. And she explained me the whole concept of being, because back then in the 50s, most people didn't know,
Native Hawaiian is a race.
Yeah. They think, well, they would say you're Polynesian and Chinese and Korean and Japanese. And she'd explain it to me. I'm like 8 years old. Then my second cousin Vivian, my mom and my aunt, my sister would try to brush her hair. She's half Black, half Armenian. They didn't know how to brush a girl's hair like that. And so, and then my dad is an Armenian priest and stuff. So my parents would expose me to other churches and religions and stuff. So growing up, I was lucky. Almost every ethnic group, I had at least some firsthand account. And when I post on Facebook for years, and I'll tell you a secret, I always say my Korean family, my Japanese family, Armenian family, Mexican family. So I try to do that for every ethnic group. Because when I was young, I had some great mentors of every group you could think of. And I'd be dead if it wasn't for them. And when I worked at Sanyo in 77, even though I'd hear the myth, well, Japanese men don't have any feelings. Well, there was a guy in his 40s who they said was a burnout. And in Japan, in his 20s, he supervised like a few hundred people. And, even back in Japan in the 50s, 60s, 70s, there were young managers that supervised a lot of employees. It was rare. And they had him doing stuff in the parts department, tech support. Basically, was helping everybody, doing simple stuff. He didn't do anything complex. You could see that he had some issues. He was very nice. He was charming. But when big shots came from Japan, and they'd have the big meetings out of respect, they'd always have him present. And I'm thinking, what company now would keep a former top executive around just to do like little tasks and do assistant stuff? But they'd still, out of respect, invite him to all these big meetings when they'd come. And then when the guys would come in from Japan, they'd all be chanting, Matsui-san. And I'm going, so I didn't know a whole lot about Nisei, but I learned. But the thing that pisses me off, and the humility, I know I worked with 442 veterans, but they're not going to tell you in the 70s, I'm in my early 20s.
Well, and a lot of them were traumatized too. They didn't want to talk about it,
Oh, like, yeah, of course, sure. Yeah.
Hawaii, there were actually a lot of veteran clubs in Southern California as well, but it wasn't like Hawaii, where like thousands of them would come home and they're celebrated and there's parades for them and stuff. It was very different in California. Some people were not allowed to even move back into their homes. They were still not allowed to buy houses in certain areas. Even Senator Inoue, he had lost his right arm and he was wearing all his medals and his hook, and he went into he wanted to come back looking good, and he tried to get a haircut, and the barber was like, we don't cut Jap hair, and so it was a very different experience for the the Japanese Americans on the West Coast. Yeah.
Yeah.
They didn't talk about it as much.
By the way, on your film, the Japanese prisoner, was he recreated?
Yeah, you know what? It's so funny because every Q&A, people ask me about him. Every single one. So Kazuo Sakamaki, he washed up at Bellows Beach on December 8th, and he was captured actually by David Akui and this other guy. But in the capture party, there was Kyupi Tsubota, who and actually a couple other Japanese AJ. In Hawaii, we call them AJA, American of Japanese.
Yeah, right. Uh-huh.
On the mainland, it's JA.
Yeah.
But in Hawaii, so there was a National Guard that was federalized the year before, and so the 298th Infantry they were Tropic Lightning. They're known as Tropic Lightning now, but back then that's where all the National Guard guys went to. So the capture party, so Kyupi really did interrogate him. He was like, he had two questions for him. He was like, what was your mission, and where's your comrade, and all the guy said was, I'm cold.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And then they kept him at Sand Island, and they called it the bird cage. They kept him separate from the prisoners, and it was really, to add insult to injury. They weren't internees. This was before Executive Order 9066. And so it was like the FBI had this list. It was like the ABC list, and they just rounded up people of suspicion. On December 7th, they rounded up about 300 people, and eventually about 1,100 people, but that was still less than 1% of the Japanese population in Hawaii that was taken prisoner. They did call them prisoners of war, which is like, what the heck, how can I be a prisoner of war if I'm in this country that I immigrated to and I have been living in for like 30, 40 years? It's just so insulting, and so, I mean, we didn't have time to include all the stories, but Matsujiro Otani, he, the founder of the Honolulu Fish Auction, we include Komea dying, the 84-year-old hotel owner, but, they did try to commit suicide. Like Matsujiro Otani's bunkmate tried to commit suicide because it was so hopeless, and they were taken without any cause, really. They didn't know what they had done wrong. They hadn't done anything wrong, really. They didn't know how they would get out or what was going to happen to them. So they were very hopeless and depressed. Yeah. It was very sad.
I guess, it was fairly recently that we on the mainland started seeing some photographs of a long-lost concentration camp.
Honouliuli. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although, see, that's the thing. It's not really a concentration camp. It's really more of a POW camp. And so it's like 10 minutes from where I live, but it's and so there were like 3,000 POWs, like real POWs, captured from Saipan and all these okay. But there were some local families there, maybe like 300 or so. And so like Herb Yanamura, who I mentioned earlier, he was MIS, and they actually sent them to Honouliuli to train, to learn how to interrogate these prisoners, once they got to them. And it was funny, Herb has some stories about that. Like there's this Korean guy, and one of the MIS guys had to relieve himself, so he went, to this building or off to the bushes, and then this Korean guy started an internee, like a prisoner, starts cussing him out because he's like, that's where I eat. You are defiling this. So he's like so amused. He's like, here's this prisoner cussing out, a military guy. And then also like the local people, they had some of them had family members there, and they would actually go and visit them, on weekends. They would pack up, musubi and bento lunch, and they would go off to the Joanne Ninomiya. Mm-hmm. A lot of us know her as like she's the reason Kaida is big in Hawaii, but I think it was her grandfather was one of those people who was held at Honouliuli. And so she was like a baby, was a very little girl, but she remembers, going to visit. Yeah. So yeah, Kazuo Sakamaki was he was the first POW captured, and the story that I include in Go for Broke is actually not. He didn't really become friends with Matsujiro Otani. I had to composite a lot of characters.
Oh, yeah.
So it was a Mr. Furuya who became friends with Kazuo Sakamaki, who eventually, and he wrote a book too. It's called I Attacked Pearl Harbor, which is a little funny because actually he didn't attack Pearl Harbor, right? He was captured. And then Mr. Furuya, he also wrote his memoirs as well as Matsujiro Otani, but they were actually written in Japanese. And so only recently they were translated to English. And Matsujiro Otani's memoirs, that's his family has it, and his wishes were he didn't want it to be sold. He just wanted it to be shared. So his son Akira Otani, who is my friend in the movie, he gave it to me when I was trying to write the script. So I would have more to draw from, and real experiences. And so that really did happen too. Like there was a carpenter, who went and he's like fixing the wall or something, or the thing, and then here's all these poor prisoners, and they're like, hey, can you tell our families we're alive because they don't know where we are, and he's very torn because on one hand, of course, you want to help them. On the other hand, what's going to happen to me if I help you? I don't know what you did. So it was just a really, really awful time for the Japanese community.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we're going to get ready to wrap up here. We've been going for 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Oh, wow.
So
Time flies when you're having fun.
It does.
I enjoyed this kind of stuff. I don't know if more before the pandemic or differently, but now it's like, wow, when can we get back together? It makes me more anxious, I guess.
It's such a treat,
You guys all look gorgeous on camera. I look a little weird, but you guys look great.
So I would like to go through one more time. Like if people want to find out more about you guys, or maybe buy something from you, commission something, how can they locate you? We'll start off with Willie.
Oh, yeah. I'm easy to reach on my email, which is very simple, itowk@earthlink.net.
Okay, itowk@earthlink.net. And Phil?
You can go on Facebook, Phil Ye, .com or whatever the Facebook. I don't know.
Well, wait, don't you have the Winged Tiger page too?
We have wingtiger.com, I think, right? Yes, we have wingtiger.com and on philyefineart.com.
And that, by the way, that he says he's been spending the time painting, and that's a lot of that's going into that fine art site. So,
right,
Greg.
Yeah, I'm on Facebook. I'm the only Greg Koudoulian in the universe and planet El CORTEZ. Easy to find.
Okay, and Stacey, I know you said it earlier, but go ahead and give it again.
Oh yeah, so on Facebook, of course, you can friend me. And then the comic book is also on Facebook as well as the movie. But you can go to watch the movie. You can go to goforbrokemovie.com. There's a link to see it on Vimeo, and then the comic book is at 442comicbook.com.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We'll say aloha.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much, Mike. This was really, really great.
Thank you, Michael, for all of this. Willie, Stacey, Phil, thank you very much.
Oh,
bye.
Thank you.